please.
Councilmember Clark,
Here.
Councilmember Nyan,
Here.
Councilmember Farmer, Councilmember McCutcheon,
Here.
Councilmember Rambo,
Here.
Councilmember Flasher,
Here.
Councilmember Galani,
Here.
and Chair Bartoni.
Here. So the only thing I want to say, we got 3 planning matters, 7 park matters, a closed session, and a list of guest speakers for today. So we've got a full agenda. What I will ask everybody, it helps me if you use the raised hand feature on the screen, because it actually cues you in order, and because I do a little bit of guessing as to who had their hand up first, and you guys are very helpful letting me know that. But if you can, using that would be helpful. Next on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. I need a motion for the approval of the minutes from the last meeting. Made by Teresa, seconded by Mr. Flasher. Any questions, any comments on the minutes? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? And any abstentions? Wonderful, great, thank you. Next on our agenda is public input. This is obviously an opportunity for the public to speak. We have a few names listed as attendees. I don't know if those are for, I know some of them are for our guest speakers, but if any of those, I guess, can they raise their hand, Mr. Cruz, or is Melanie, are you doing it? Who's doing that part? So Libby Wilson has her hand up, so I'm assuming that she wants to speak at this point. So if we can move her over. Great. Okay, looks like we've got her. And Libby, if you'll just say your name and the ward you're from, that would be great. Oh, you were muted still.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm Libby Wilson, and I'm from Ward 1. And I would just like to speak briefly about one item that's on the agenda is a proposed horse park for the city of Wildwood. So on behalf of many of the equestrian property owners and horse owners in Wildwood, I'd like to express support for the designation of 4064 Henkin Road to be used as a horse park. As you know, Wildwood has a large community of horse owners and enthusiasts, as well as a number of equine businesses within our city. And the horse park would provide a safe location to ride with access and resources for equestrian residents. The donated vote property is a good candidate for the horse park, as it contains about 27 acres, and the terrain there is includes like open meadows and sloping wooded land that would be suitable for horses and hikers. Other parks within Wildwood where horses are permitted don't really have any open areas for riding or specifically dedicated trails for horses only. And those dedicated trails really provides a whole nother level of safety for both the riders and the horses. This property also has direct access to Henkin Road that is appropriate for horse trailer access. The property is located in an area of Wildwood that's surrounded by many existing horse properties and is centrally located for Wildwood horse owners, as well as neighboring equine communities. And again, it would provide a very safe area to ride without other distractions such as bikes and other animals. And this would be similar to the support and trail designation for mountain bikes with like the Gateway Off-Road Cyclist Organization. The horse park would be a great addition to Wildwood and would support our local community. Thanks for your time and attention tonight.
Thank you for speaking. We appreciate it. We have another hand up. Stacy Rolfe. I'm gonna hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. If we can move her over.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay?
We can hear you. Go ahead, please.
Okay, all right, there I am. First of all, thank you for allowing us to have a few minutes to speak this evening. I just wanted to say something in support of what Libby just said, and that is she's done a ton of research on this. So she's really been kind of this campaign leader to get this horse park going. Nobody understands all of the specifics quite as well as Libby does. And so, you know, I guess just rallying around what she's saying, I think just to make my my one addition to what Libby said is that Wildwood has so much to offer for so many people. And one thing that we commonly hear is that Wildwood is horse country. And it is. We have a lot of horses. I have a lot of horses, and we are horse country. So it would be nice to have the city really stand behind this common phrase of "we are horse country." You know, help us and let people have an alternative location that they can come ride their horses in a very safe environment, controlled, hopefully fenced environment, and give people an opportunity to have a different experience with their horse, taking them out rather than riding on their own property or maybe Babbler Park. I think the horse park is really something that could be just a great key feature for horse owners to have another way to enjoy their horses. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, and thank you for speaking. We appreciate it. We have another hand up. If Lulu Bogelin, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right as well. If we can move her over, please. Okay, we have you on this side, but you are muted. If you can unmute and just state your name and your ward, please.
Hi, I am Lulu Boglin. I am in Ward 6, and I am the Executive Director of Equine Assisted Therapy down on 109 in Ward 6. And I too just wanted to come on as a horse owner myself, as the director of the Equine Center, the Therapy Center, just in favor of all of the work and the time and the effort that Libby Wilson has put into this. She has really done her homework. She's met individually, she's met in groups, and I just think this would be such a wonderful addition to our community, sort of recapping what both ladies have already said. We're kind of known as a horse community, and I think also bringing into light what economic benefits this has to our community. The horse industry is a $30 billion a year business for the United States. It increases our property values. It increases the business as far as those businesses that support the equestrians and the horses, with veterinarians, with tack shops, with feed stores. So I too just wanted to voice my opinion that I think this would be such a wonderful addition to not only our horse community, but our community as a whole.
Thank you so much for speaking. We appreciate it. I don't see any other hands up on if there is anybody else that's watching that would like to speak. If they could use the raised hand feature, give you a couple seconds. Otherwise, we will just move on with the agenda. Okay, it looks like that was it. So thank you to all of our guest speakers. It's really important and we appreciate that. That takes us to our action items under planning matters. Like I said, we have 3 items. The first one is the sound analysis findings. I know we do have Dr. Thunder here with us tonight. So Joe, I'll just let you take it from here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And to Mr. Chair and the members of the committee, I've done my best to try to send as many links to Joe Farmer as possible, so I apologize.
He sent me another text. I think he's having some issues on his end. So he's watching on YouTube. So
Okay.
he's at least listening, but yeah, I think it's just like a bad day for it.
Well, I apologize. It didn't his name was spelled with it wasn't spelled with an M, but an N, and I thought I promoted somebody inappropriately, so my apologies to everyone. First and foremost, to Dr. Thunder, thanks for being here tonight. We do appreciate it. And as you know, back in 2021, this particular committee requested that there be a sound analysis conducted of the 2 major arterial corridors under the direction of the state of Missouri. Those corridors were Route 100 and Route 109. The department engaged acoustical associates to provide a proposal. That proposal was submitted to the committee and then ultimately to City Council. Back in June of 2021, Dr. Thunder's son, Steve, came out and did the analysis of the 2 corridors, and ultimately a report was provided in the fall of last year. There were a number of questions relating to the report and some modifications that were necessary to correct certain information. Ultimately, the committee at the January 2022 meeting received the 4th draft of that report as prepared by Acoustical Associates. Along with that, a series of questions were provided to Dr. Thunder, and those responses were provided as well. Tonight, Dr. Thunder is here to respond to questions and provide any explanations relating to the report that the committee would like to pursue. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'll stop talking and let Dr. Thunder and the committee take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Dr. Thunder, go ahead, please.
Okay, you can hear me now? All right, sorry. I've been on Zoom all day. I've been teaching a class most of the day on Zoom, took a break, had a late afternoon business meeting on Zoom, and here we are again on Zoom. So it's definitely Zoom Tuesday.
It is for you.
Glad I was able to show up to talk, and I don't know how much you want me to summarize the report, go through it. Obviously, you've had it. We're in our 4th draft on it, but basically the approach here was really to use a very sophisticated program called Sound Plan, which is used internationally. That program was really initially first developed for community noise because of traffic and so forth. It has since expanded greatly in terms of its capabilities for doing even indoor acoustics and things of that sort. So that was a very eloquent program for us to use. And it's based on the traffic flow that we can get from the Missouri Department of Transportation. That data is available even on an hourly basis so that we can predict what the sound levels are on an hourly basis, because most of the time when you do noise studies, you're looking at 1 hour equivalent levels or 1 hour time average levels throughout the day and how they vary. Certainly what we wanted to do is to verify that model as well, and that was one of the reasons for Steve's visit. First, so that he could do a site inspection. He did use a drone to kind of fly over the area to be able to ensure that we were accurately modeling buildings and large buildings that might cause reflections and shield sound and things of that sort, to accurately characterize the topography, because sound changes based on elevation changes, based on forest land and vegetation and things of that sort. And then he also set up 3 spots for some actual field monitoring, where we would actually set up a recorder and do an actual audio recording for over an hour at 3 different spots. And the reason we do that is to compare that with the model to see if we've got some agreement. If it's off a little bit, we adjust it, we calibrate it, because the daily volume on that particular day might be a little different from what the average that's reported by the state. And that calibration was really right on. We compared our model with those 3 locations, and at 2 locations it was right on the button. At the other one it was within 2 dB. And in acoustics, 2 dB is nothing. 2 dB is something that you can't hardly measure with instrumentation, nor can you hear the difference to the human ear. So the human ear only begins to hear that there's a difference at 3 decibels. That's considered the just noticeable difference. So we were very happy with how the model was able to do that. So once the model draws all these contours for that whole area, and both those contours for daytime and nighttime were published for you in the report, and it was shown by colors, that gives you a feeling for the intensity of the sound and how it dissipates as you move away from the road. But what most people are really interested in is the actual decibel numbers. Can you extract the decibel numbers? And I know that some of you had said, gee, could we do a study or measurement at this point or that point? And certainly the answer is yes. If it's within that model area that we showed you in both those figures, then all we need to do is go back in that model and select the crosshairs at a particular point, and we will have a pop-up of the decibel levels that are created. And some of that is shown by the figure that we had in there, figure 3, which shows a single point where we actually established reference points. And some of those reference points we discussed with Joe when he said, here are the points that we're interested in right now to take a look at. So we marked them on figure 3 to show you where those were. I think there were a dozen of them. And then at each point then we showed you a block of data. And that data shows the sound levels at level 1 and level 2, because if it was an apartment building, for example, that had 6 stories, then typically sound levels get higher the higher up you go, and sometimes that might be an interest to a community if they have a high-rise building or something like that. What are the sound levels on the 7th floor balcony compared to the ground floor, for example? So that's how that's structured. And then the first number is the daytime, and the last column is the nighttime. And typically you'll see a drop in that. And the reason why, obviously, is because traffic at night drops and so does the sound. And that was the basis of our evaluation. The biggest thing then was to compare that with Criterion. Now, there's quite a lot of Criterion. In fact, one of our drafts was to go back and take a look at the actual Missouri DOT Criterion that they have. And their Criterion, this is kind of modeled after the Federal Highway Authority or Administration in terms of trying to approve funding for a barrier. So if you were to put a road in, the federal government would require that such an analysis be done to make a determination as to whether or not a sound barrier would be required and whether or not the federal government would help fund for that. Now, the Missouri Criterion is fairly high. It's 67 decibels. And so bear in mind, when you're using that criteria, it's really for speech interference and not for noise, annoyance, okay? So the fact that our numbers were less than 67 decibels doesn't mean that, according to Missouri, it would be not annoying. It just means that 67 decibels is the line in the sand that the state draws as to where they'll fund or approve projects for a barrier. So it's probably not the best criterion to use. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development has a set of criteria too, and their criteria is to show that once you're up to 65 decibels, you are acceptable. And between 65 and 70, I think it is, it's normally acceptable if you can implement some controls, and above 75, it's normally not acceptable. And the reason they use that is for housing that gets federal funding. So we've worked on a number of those projects. If you wanted to build senior housing, for example, and you wanted to get some federal funding for it, then you would have to go through an analysis to show HUD what the noise levels are. And if they are higher than this criteria, you would have to show them what kinds of sound mitigation would you implement in the project to make it acceptable. So here again, that's probably not the best criterion to use to judge whether or not a location is experiencing an annoyance. The US EPA has criteria that dates back to 1974. And that criteria probably has a better scientific consensus baseline. In other words, everything else that we talk about, even the state of Illinois noise criteria, a lot of these states would take the US EPA criteria, but then they would modify it or change it based on the realities, based on practical circumstances, and based on politics as well. So I would look at the EPA and say, this was developed by a group of scientists, and it was a scientific consensus that they agreed on. It was not a political consensus. The US EPA criterion is just that. It's a criterion. It's not the law. It's not a code or anything like that. It's put out so that states and localities could see scientifically a basis for making decisions to enact their own state, county, or local codes for noise. The line that they draw is 55 decibels, and that particular criteria is based on a whole day average. So we're not looking at just 1 hour. They recognize that sound can vary throughout the day and throughout the night, and I've been in locations where near some railroad yards, for example, in Ohio, where the nighttime noise levels from the railroad yard are actually higher than they are during the daytime. So the way the EPA deals with this is to understand that between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m., they put a 10 decibel penalty on any noise created during that time. Why? The reason is obvious, because that's the time when people want to settle down, they want to sleep, maybe leave their windows open and so forth. So when we do a study to determine this 24 hours criterion, which is called the day-night level, we have to know what the daytime level is, then we have to know what the nighttime level is and add 10 dB to the nighttime level and then average it for the 24-hour period. In essence, what a lot of states and localities have done is to say, well, essentially what that means, if you're saying 55 dB, then it means our code should say 45 dB at night, 10 dB lower, and 55 dB during the daytime. And so that's why you see a lot of codes floating around the country that have a 55 dB daytime and a 45 dB nighttime. That particular 55 dB criterion that they adopted was based on traffic noise too. I mean, it's been used for other kinds of noise, but it's based on numerous studies in urban areas and near high traffic and low traffic areas. And that's where they decided to draw the line in the sand, because just because you are above 55 dB doesn't mean everybody's annoyed. And if you're below 55 dB, nobody's annoyed. It's not that kind of a threshold, okay? It's a psychoacoustic thing, and basically that number was selected to protect 90 to 95% of the people. So what we're saying is when the sound levels are below 55 dB, then that's going to be satisfactory to 90% of the people, okay? So it's not designed to protect everyone. There's still going to be some people that are annoyed by noise at 54 dB, something underneath that criterion. So that's a good criterion, I think, to use. It's also supported by another one that I presented in the report, which is another scientific consensus standard by the American National Standard Institute, also known as ANSI. That is a name that is familiar to most Americans because they have thousands and thousands of standards that we all follow. And they have one that's designed for determining the suitability of a particular land. So a number of times we might get a call from a client that says, I want to build a housing development in this area, but I need to know if it's acceptable acoustically, and if it's not, what kind of things can we do to make it acceptable acoustically. And so we would go out and we would do this 24-hour measurement. We would compare it against the standard, and the standard would tell us, based on the kind of use, whether or not that would be acceptable. So if you are a single family home with an outdoor living area, that's going to have a lower criterion than if it was a multifamily dwelling, an apartment building with very limited or no outdoor type of usage. So in this particular case, there are a lot of homes along this corridor that are outdoors, single family with patios that are facing. So we use that kind of criterion, and basically that criterion agrees with the US EPA that says if it's under 55 dB, it's okay. So if we presented a table in there that showed all 12 different locations, and we presented levels for the daytime, and we presented a nighttime, and then there was a third category where we actually calculated what's called the day-night level. In other words, with a 10 dB penalty placed on whatever nighttime noise there is. And if you look at that criterion and use 55 dB as your criterion, not the 65 dB that's used by HUD, and not 67 dB that's used by Missouri, you find that most all the locations that Joe had picked out exceed to one degree or another that criterion. And that's the basis for the annoyance, is it does exceed that scientific criterion. It doesn't exceed the standards for a barrier and stuff like that, but those are higher standards that are meant for different purposes. So I think that our study kind of agrees with some of the folks that feel annoyed in certain areas. There's certain locations there that are high. Location number 10 was 7 dB above that. Location 2 and location 6 were 5 dB above that. For 11 and 12, it was 3 dB above that, and we said 3 dB was a just noticeable difference, but I would include that. Only location 9 and 1 were within 2 dB, and those were locations that I would say, because the human ear couldn't tell the difference, those aren't a high priority. But it certainly allows you to rank order all 12 of these locations in terms of their annoyance, and the results were kind of intuitive. The ones with the highest noise levels were clearly the ones that were closest to these roads. And that's completely understandable, because everybody with 2 ears understands that as you get closer to a noise source, the sound level goes up. And in acoustics, we have a law for that. It's called the inverse square law. Every time you cut the distance in half, the sound level from traffic goes up 4 or 5 dB. Well, 5 dB is a significant difference to go up. So when you're talking about trying to get some reasonable amount of buffer, it's going to depend a lot on the kind of road, the speed. These are things that the sound plan model takes into consideration. We take into consideration the speed, the mix with the amount of truck traffic and so forth that's on there. It takes into consideration any incline, because if you're going uphill, everybody knows you got to put more torque into it, and that creates more noise and so forth. So sound plan was a very good model to be able to use this, because it takes all that into consideration. And that basically summarizes our approach and our findings. And I know that you all have some questions, or some of you do, and I know that there was some desire to take a look at other points. Certainly we can do that. If you tell us what other points you'd like us to examine, we just go right back into that sound plan model and click on the point that you're interested in, and it will tell us what that data is. The only exception to that would be if you pick a point that's beyond the area that we gave you, okay? That's because based on the points that Joe and I were looking at in our program, we drew kind of a square area and told the model, this is the area that we're concerned with, this is the area we want to look at. But I know in some of your questions, you are asking questions about noise levels around the roundabouts. Well, a couple of those roundabouts to the south and to the north were beyond that area. We can still get at that data because we'll use the same traffic patterns and traffic volume flows, but we now have to go into the model and extend that into those areas to be able to extract and pull that data from those areas. So, anybody have any questions? Start a discussion here.
So, yeah, thank you for the very comprehensive report there, Dr. Thunder. So does anybody have any questions? And if you can use the raised hand feature, that does help me out.
Looks like
We'll
Teresa's got one.
start with Teresa. Teresa, go ahead, please. Deborah, I got you next.
Yes, Dr. Thunder, I had sent you some of my notes, just
Right.
some things before, so that you knew what I was going to ask you about. And I don't know if you could understand my notes or not. I didn't put
Yep.
them in a good email, but and thank you, Mr. Bunich, for sending those on to him. But yeah, I think if I'm not mistaken, last meeting we did have a motion about going ahead and adding the roundabouts, the 3 roundabouts, the 2 south and the 1 at Pond Grover. And I may be wrong about the voting on that, but I think that we did. And if we can do that, one of my questions would be, what is the cost? Is there an additional cost to extending that the boundary for your model? And I wanted to tell you that this report is very extensive and very it's an excellent report. It's very clear. It explains it to all of us lay people that maybe we don't understand all of the stuff that you're talking about. But I also wanted to mention that even though some of these numbers are under the specifications that you're going by for the limit, there's still, as I understand, a lot of neighbors that are complaining about this. So I think it's more than the 90%. So I agree that it still is going to be an annoyance for many of the people, maybe because their houses are closer to the road. And I don't know if those are the ones that are complaining or the ones that have the farther houses from the road. But I just had some questions about do we have the complete root cause for the noise that they are experiencing? Because if they have started, if there's more complaints now than there were a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, then, we have some change that has happened. One of the changes, the bright leaf went in. I just think we need to identify all the changes that have happened to make sure that we've got the entire root cause for the noise. Is there something else that's happening? Do we have more commercial vehicles, like you talked about, that you assess for the type of vehicle? But are we getting more commercial vehicles, bigger vehicles, higher engine power vehicles coming up and down that road? And is there a way that we can limit that? Can we reduce that speed limit for certain, for big trucks? Can we can we ask MoDOT to decrease the speed limit from 55 to 45, as I think you had suggested? That would help. And I also had down some possible remediations. Limits vehicles over a certain weight class. I don't know if we could do that. That wouldn't be really feasible, but there's just so many things that could be contributing to this noise. I would hope that we're looking at all of them and not just the traffic noise as assessed. That's all I have to say.
Okay, I can respond to a few of those questions. One thing to keep in mind is that we've seen more complaints about traffic noise recently. My explanation for that is a lot of people probably were used to COVID area. When we hit a year and a half ago, traffic volumes were much lower because everybody was Zooming and working out of their homes and so forth. And now that it's increased, I'm sure all of us have seen that the roads seem busier. I know they are in the Chicago area. And more traffic is going to mean more noise. And so that noise, instead of creeping up slowly, because that happens typically with roads is that you see this decibel creep is what we call it. So every year the roads get a little bit busier, but people adjust to that, and it's so slow maybe they don't even notice it. But if this happens dramatically in just a 1 or 2 year period, then it's very noticeable to people. And so that may be the source of some of their comments, is they notice it now more than ever because the traffic actually increased. Now that's not reflected in the MDOT stuff that we have. I have to check with Steve to see how dated the levels were and how they might compare. I don't know if you've done any traffic studies yourself in your town to get more precise information about the traffic volumes in those corridors and how they might compare or might not compare with the state's data. So that might be something to examine and look at to see how current is that state data for those particular routes. Truck mix is an important thing. When we use traffic data, it presumes a certain truck mix, meaning that a certain percentage of the average daily vehicles that are going through that area are trucks. And trucks are definitely louder than cars. It's been said that one truck is equal to the annoyance of 15 cars, you know. And it's related to horsepower. The more horsepower that a vehicle has, the more noise is going to be a byproduct of that. So if you have a lot more commercial vehicles that are being used than maybe what was before, that could certainly be a source of increases that you might see over time. We talked about speed limit. I think that's something that definitely should be explored with the traffic authorities to see if you can lower that. In my report, I indicated that if you could lower it from 55 to 45 miles per hour, which I think is totally reasonable going through a kind of a close residential area like that, you would get down to about 5 decibel reduction, which is a significant reduction. And that's without doing anything else. That's without any barriers or changing the truck mix or anything like that. Speed is related directly to noise. The higher the speed, the greater the noise, not only the noise coming from the engines, but the noise coming from the tires as well. I think I mentioned that there's some hope on the horizon too. You're all probably familiar with the current emerging trend of electric vehicles. If you watch the Super Bowl, it seemed like there was a commercial every half hour on an electric truck, okay? We are definitely moving toward electrical vehicles. And the good news about that for the neighbors is and the models are going to have to change to reflect that. The good news is as more and more electric vehicles are being used, then the roadways are going to be quieter and quieter. And I think in my report, I presented a comparison between a Prius and a regular car that was powered by a gas engine, and the difference is 7 dB. And in New York City, believe it or not, I've gotten calls from the blind community wanting the city of New York, who's used electric vehicles for their city vehicles, they would like those vehicles to have some sort of audible warning device on them because they are so quiet, they don't feel safe walking across the street because they can't hear the cars, okay? And so that is going to be a blessing for us in terms of environmental noise when we move to that. You'll still see tire noise as being a problem, but that's going to be based on the kinds of tires that people use. It's going to be based on the texture and the type of the road that's going to be used. If the road is wet, for example, it kicks out more high frequency sound because of that wet nature and so forth. But lowering the speed limit will take care of both the engine noise and it will take care of the tire noise and drop that sound level by almost 5 decibels, which is significant. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think it's something we'll definitely ask staff to look into and, I mean, to see if that's an option, because that would be an easy fix. That's for sure. If that, those numbers can actually drop that much. Deborah, go ahead, please. I got you next.
Thank you for the detailed explanations. So the one of the areas that at least I thought was going to be addressed was at the roundabout at Pond Grover, and then the roundabouts, I guess right at 109 and 100. We've had a lot of complaints about noise increasing since the roundabouts were put in. I know at Pond Grover, for 10 years at least, they were complaining about the sound. They are very close to 109, but since the roundabouts have gotten pulled in, the sound level has increased. And like you said, especially related to trucks that are going through there.
Okay.
So, all right, do you actually have to go back in the field to get the readings for those two areas, or can you extrapolate it? And if so, how accurate is that?
It'd be accurate. I mean, that's one of the reasons why we did the field testing, why we physically went out there, is to corroborate the model. We've done that. We're happy with that. We're satisfied with that. So I have complete faith in what that model is able to do for us. So no, I would not expect that we would have to go out there, but we would have to more closely examine that area, because again, it's beyond that rectangular area, the study area that we had. So we have to go back up there, and Steve's already been out there. He hasn't been out in that specific area. But if since he has been out there, and since Google Earth should be relatively accurate for that area, because the latest Google Earth that I have is showing, let me see, I've got a date up here. It's showing the last date is September of 2021. That's pretty recent, okay? And so that's good, because that means that we can more closely model those roundabouts for you and see the homes. If you've got areas where homes have not been put in yet, I don't know how actively you're building in the area, that late information we would want to know. What has happened, for example, in that area since September of 2021. Then we can appropriately model it.
I know that the roundabout there by Canberry Place, those residents have been complaining as well. It seems like anywhere that we've put a roundabout close to residents, they're complaining about the noise level. And I think for many reasons, it's important to get that information, but we're getting ready to install some more roundabouts. And if we're going to go forward with those roundabouts, we need to know how to mitigate the sound.
Yeah. Could you name the specific location? You made mention of a road, Cambridge, was it, or?
Well, one is 109 in Pond Grover, and then the other one, Joe, help me out. It's right there, 100 and 109. Is it on 109? What?
Actually, Dr. Thunder, Steve did do a test at Canberry, the subdivision. And so that's one of the control points, actually, I think. And on January 12th, I sent you an email with the additional locations. I don't think you probably saw it. So, and in the email, I also told you that if you could add it to the model, we'll compensate you for the additional time.
Sure. Yeah, we can do that. We can talk about the pinpoints to use, and we can share that and refine them if we need. And once we have the exact locations down that you're interested in, then I can have Steve go back and go into the model and do that. I'll have to caution you all, though, that wouldn't be soon. Steve had a tumor removed from his brain just a couple of weeks ago, so he had major neural surgery at Northwestern Hospital. The good news is that it was successful. They removed the tumor. They're not sure if they got it all, but they did say that they know for sure it wasn't malignant, and it is the slow-growing variety. So even if they did happen to leave some, it would just be some monitoring. But in the meantime, Steve is in speech therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, because when you go through that side of the brain, That's where the speech and hearing mechanism is. And so for several days, he couldn't even talk. And I'm happy to say that he's talking now in sentences and doing well. It's just going to take time for him to recover. So before he could probably even get at that model and start to tinker with it and change it, maybe several weeks from now, not several months. I'm the speech therapist and the occupational therapist are talking with therapy through March, and they're thinking that April he should be pretty good to go. So there would be a delay in getting at the extension of that study, just so you know.
Well, thank you for letting us know that, and we certainly understand that. And obviously, everybody in this committee and within our community here wish him the very best. And yeah, hope that we do have him out here. Hope he is out here soon doing that. I guess he probably wants to get out here sooner than all of us.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yeah. And of course, I've had clients that say, "Well, why don't you do the computer program?" It's like, no, I'm not doing that. I sent that kid to school for a week to learn how to run that complicated
Right.
program. I have no interest at my age
Yeah.
in spending a week in school to learn how to run a program that he knows how to run already. So we've had to turn some jobs away, some new jobs, just because of the timing element, that he's the only guy that's really capable of doing that. So he'll get back at it. It's just he needs some time to improve and recover.
Thank you.
I'm due
So-
with Don. I have one follow-up question.
Oh, sure. Go ahead, Deborah.
So what are your suggestions, Dr. Thunder, for mitigating the noise level, especially right there at 10 or 100 and Villages of Brightleaf? Or Evergreen Forest, I guess the backyards of Evergreen Forest, wherever that is, exactly where the pin is. What suggestions do you have for mitigating that?
What pin number was that, if I could ask?
Joe, is it number 10?
Oh, is that the closest one then?
I think so.
Yeah. There's not much separation, is there, between the yard and the road?
No.
Yeah, that's a problem. The only way to really mitigate that is with a berm or a barrier or a combination of both. A berm is very popular by developers, but it's used mostly for new developments when you are able to get a planner in there that can plan for that space, because with a berm, I'm told that the landscapers need a 3-to-1 slope and not anything more steeper than that. Otherwise, they might not be able to landscape if you want it to be landscape. But an earth berm is formidable. It will last a long time, obviously. You can put a lot of vegetation on it. And we know, interesting enough, from psychoacoustic studies, that if people can't see the noise source, guess what? They think it's quieter, believe it or not. And we call that the green effect. And there have been actual research articles on that where they've taken surveys of people and they've done nothing to the sound. They did this with an electric power company in Texas, and they did nothing to the sound. The sound level did not change, but they put little slats in the chain link fences and stuff and kind of put a visual screening to it. And they told the people it was a barrier for sound barrier purposes. But they all said, hey, that sounds pretty good. It sounds quieter. So one of the important aspects, being in the area of psychoacoustics, because noise is a psychological and acoustical element, is to visually screen the sound sources. So if you can't see the trucks, you can't see the cars, and all you see is green, that in itself is helpful. Maybe not to reduce the noise much, but at least to reduce the effect, the psychoacoustic effect. So a berm with vegetation on top of it helps out a lot. But if you don't have that space, then what I recommend is a berm that's several feet high and then a fence on top of that. And if you had, for example, an 8-foot fence, which is typically, I don't know what your code calls for, but most towns, you have to get a waiver approved if it's over 8 feet. And so the way around that maybe is to build a 3-foot berm, put an 8-foot fence on it, and now you got effectively an 11-foot high fence. It completely blocks the view of the traffic. and that would reduce the sound significantly. The closer you are, the more significant it is, probably on the order of 6, 7, 8 decibels to have an 11-foot high barrier of some sort. That would be a 3-foot berm plus an 8-foot fence. Right now, if you've got only that little bit of space to work with, that's really the only practical solution. In a railroad case I was in, the railroad actually gave the homeowners money to build their own little barriers around their patios, glass barriers. And the reason we made them glass is because beyond the railroad, there was a forest preserve, and nobody liked the idea of a 20-foot high fence built right on the railroad property. They much preferred just building a 6 to 8 foot high fence and making it kind of a glass wall, if you will, so they could visually still see the forest, but the glass wall acted as a sound barrier, so at least when they were on their patios, having a conversation with their friends, they could at least understand their friends, they could at least talk over the cell phone without having to retreat indoors where it's quiet. That's a possible solution, to focus that effort on just individuals that are so close to those roads that it's difficult to put any kind of meaningful barrier at their property line or the roadway, right of way.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Joe, we got a couple follow-ups, the additional information on the roundabouts, reaching out to Missouri Highway Department to see if there's any possibility that the speed limit could get lowered. I don't know if that's for you or Mr. Cross or what it's entailed in that. But at this point, are you looking for anything else from us, or we just have these follow-ups and we'll just wait until we get that additional information?
Mr. Chair, that would be my suggestion. Allow the department to address those questions that have been raised both by Ms. Clark and Ms. McCutcheon, to expand the study area to include the roundabouts that have been identified. And then hopefully by April, we'll have the updated study, or at least by May, and then we can kind of bring it to a close.
Okay, well, we'll move forward with that. And Dr. Thunder, thank you for your time. Thank you for being here, and very best to your son.
Okay, thank you all very much. It was great working with you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Bye now.
That takes us to the next item on our agenda, which is the Urban Night Sky Place. Just reading through this, it looks like part of it is very possible. Part of it might not be possible at all. So Joe, I'll let you take it from here.
Melanie's going to present tonight. I
Oh,
apologize.
all right.
I didn't give you the script.
I didn't get my
apologies.
cheat sheet this week, right? Go ahead, Melanie.
Thank you. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, as you may recall from our meeting in November, the Department of Planning and Parks was contacted by the International Dark Sky Association regarding their Urban Night Sky designation. And the department was directed to further research the costs and time associated with the program, as well as the International Dark Sky Community designation. The Urban Night Sky Place designation was created to provide recognition for public outdoor spaces in and near urban areas in which quality outdoor lighting practices and installations are good examples and of best management practices to surrounding communities. This designation would cost $250, and there are no additional fees after that. And in this application, the city can actually include more than one park if the city decided to. As with most designations, the majority of the work would be in the application process, which the Director of Parks at Olivet estimated at 3 to 4 hours a month for. They spent about 2 years working on their designation, but they've essentially laid the road for us and would be willing to help walk us through the process. Once certified, the time required to maintain the certification is based on the number and the extent of the events that the city hosts for the Urban Night Sky designation, and the time spent updating educational materials and a short recertification application. Given the already restrictive lighting code in Wildwood and the need to update our current lighting regulations, the department also researched the international dark sky communities. The dark sky community is a town, city, municipality that has exceptional dedication to the preservation of the night sky through implementation and enforcement of quality light policies, dark sky education, and citizen-supported ideal of dark skies. As it turns out, although Wildwood is closer than most communities to meeting those requirements, there are very big steps to get that additional, the rest of the way there. In summary, the city's lighting consultant essentially said that although the city might be 90% of the way there, 90% of the work is in that last 10%. The certification would require significantly more time and additional expenses, including hiring a lighting consultant, writing a modern lighting ordinance, conducting a lighting inventory, possibly replacing lighting fixtures that are not in compliance. The table in your packet illustrates the differences between the designations. However, the primary difference between the two is that the international dark sky communities is the implementation and enforcement aspects, whereas the urban night designation, urban night sky designation promotes and encourages best management practices through education. The international dark sky community enacts and enforces regulations for both public and private properties and requires compliance within 5 to 10 years. So the differences don't seem like a lot, but they are. The changes in regulations and related expenses require the support of the community. And so therefore, if the city wanted to pursue this, it would be more of a long-term goal than a short-term goal. However, for the time being, if the city would like to be recognized for best management practices and promote dark skies with the assistance and guidance from the Missouri chapter and the International Dark Sky Association, the city could have one or more parks designated as an urban night sky place, likely within 2 years. So tonight, the department is seeking the committee's input on whether the city of Wildwood should proceed with the application for the designation as the urban night sky place or the international dark sky community, both or neither. If the city is to pursue the urban night sky designation place, did we want to add maybe Bellevue Park in addition to Community Park? And so Mr. Vunich, Mr. Cruz, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have, but otherwise we're just seeking guidance this evening.
Thank you. And if I'm read it correctly and hearing you correctly, we can do one or both or neither, but we don't have to do both.
No, we don't have to do any of them. I mean, essentially. Okay. However, if we're going to do one application for a park, we could throw an additional park on there. And they said that if only one of the parks qualifies, the other one would just be dropped off. I think that it's pretty likely that both parks would qualify. Bellevue doesn't have any lighting and Community Park has minimal. We might have to change some light bulbs, but for the most part, they're already shielded and such. So we could do more than one park or not pursue either.
Okay, and we can do the urban night sky place and not the international also, correct?
Yes,
okay.
Unquestionably.
Okay, Rob, go ahead, please. And Tracy, I have you next, and then Teresa.
Yeah, sure. Real quickly, I think I mentioned when we first started talking about this that when I first joined council, I got a couple of contacts right away from people who were concerned about night sky compliance and so forth. And I haven't heard any since. So there's some support out there for this sort of thing. I support it wholeheartedly because of its effects, the urban light pollution on nature and stargazing and those kinds of things. But I think if it sounds like it would be lots of effort and a lot of retrofitting, which is wasteful to gain compliance as a city, but we can take that as, I really think we should take that as a long-term goal, figure out, the best types of lighting as we cycle through and replace, and as we grow as a city and build new buildings and stuff, making them compliant, every little bit will help. And in the meantime, I really think it'd be great to have at least one park designated as a night sky compliant, park. And if it's not much more effort to go for two, we might as well apply for two. And thank you very much for for all your work on this so far, guys. I think it will be just one more nice thing about our community if we can make it happen. That's all.
Rob, do you want to make the motion that we move forward with the application for the urban night sky place then?
Yes, but I'd also, how can I incorporate, does it need to be a separate motion to try to assess that long-term goal of increased night sky compliance across the board citywide? Or is that just something that the department's going to be doing anyway?
Without speaking for the department, I would think it's just more of a strategy moving forward, but I see Joe shaking his head. Yeah, I don't know if we need a motion for that part. It's more.
Okay, so I make the motion that we proceed with the application process for those two parks. Taking Melanie's advice that it's not much more effort than one.
Okay, thank you. And do we have a second on the motion? See a second from Teresa, so we do have that. Tracy, go ahead, please, and then Teresa, and then Deborah.
I just had a question on community park, and forgive me that I can't remember this, but when we're talking about the pickleball courts, are there plans to have those lighted? And even if not right away, eventually, and like certain times of the year, it's dark by 5:15, 5:30. So are there certain hours that we're not allowed to have certain lighting? Or I'm just trying to think ahead to if we get this designation and then it's like, we have these beautiful pickleball courts and we can't use them for a lot of hours. So I just didn't want that to interfere if that's the case.
I would defer to Mr. Vunich or Mr. Cruz as to the lighting on the courts. I'm not actually sure on that one.
Go ahead, Joe.
Ms. Nyan, currently the preliminary design for the pickleball courts does not include lighting. And certainly that's been an issue that we've identified as well with this particular designation. And we feel that there is a way to light them and still comply. And so from that perspective, I believe we could achieve both goals if we choose. But certainly, if that becomes a stumbling point, and we will ask that question as part of the application, then Bluffview Park would be the logical next choice because there is no lighting and no lighting planned.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Teresa, go ahead, please. Deborah, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. I echo what Mr. Rambo said earlier, and I was just going to make the motion, but since I have the floor, I'd like to just thank Ms. Ripito for all of this work she did on this. Whoever put together the comparison chart, I think in charts and graphs. So this was very helpful to look at the both of them together.
Thank you, Teresa. Deborah, go ahead, please.
I'd like a little bit more information. I don't know if you have it or not. What amount of time is the staff going to be spending on this project?
If I may, the director of parks from Olivet estimated that she spent about 3 or 4 hours a month or so for about 2 years on working on the certification. A lot of it was, communicating with the International Dark Sky Association and reviews and such, and working with them to get the certification. So that was her estimation. As far as the application process, ongoing would require special events. And so, we could have a couple of events a year. It would require evening hours, more than likely, because it would involve star watching. And so, but there are organizations that have gone out to Olivet and may be willing to come out here as well and set up programs and stuff in the evening at the park, Starry Night programs and such, where they've set up telescopes. So the amount of time that it would take to get the programs going. Initially, after the first year, if we kept the same programs in place, they get easier to plan because you kind of get it down to a science after a while. But that would be the ongoing work with it. So after certification, it would take significantly less time.
And how do you plan on going about engaging the community in order to participate?
We would promote it the same way that we do with all of our events. I mean, it would be through social media. The program also requires educating people. And so we would also have educational information up on our websites, promote it through Facebook and other social media, and actually have an event. The Starry Night event in Olivet apparently was very popular, and they had like 60 people show up. So, I mean, there is an interest.
And so other than the designation, what benefit is it to the city?
I mean, it's just pretty much recognition. It's kind of like the Tree City USA. It's recognition for being a tree city. This is recognition for our, lighting regulations, best management practices. It's also a way of informing the public, because a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of the effects that lighting can have on migration and various different aspects of nature. And so it's benefits the public just by knowledge, essentially.
One of my main concerns is, again, the time that staff would be spending on it. I know that staff spends a lot of time doing evening and weekend events. And I'd hate to see us, throw one more thing at you all.
I understand. Yes. And again, we try to get things done as efficiently and effectively as possible. And so, yes, that would have to be taken into consideration as well as to whether or not we have the staff to do so. But
yeah, you guys do an awesome job, but I also feel like you're overworked. So,
right.
That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Dan, go ahead, and Rob, I got you next.
Do we have to have this recognition to be able to have like Starry Night type events, or is it just something that looks good when we have these Starry Night type events? Like, could we still have the events without the designation?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't see any reason why we couldn't, except that I don't know that we'd be able to get the support from other organizations, like the Science Center, the St. Louis Astrology. I don't know that they'd be as willing to come out here without the promotional aspect of it. So, but I don't see why we would have to have a designation in order to have said event.
Thank you. Rob, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I just think it's kind of another feather in Wildwood's cap. Yes, we do all these great things for nature and so forth. It's another certification. It doesn't sound unduly burdensome to me, except that I was discounting the idea that one staffer probably would have to show up and coordinate with the St. Louis Stargazers or something like that for a couple of hours, a couple of nights a year. The upfront effort sounds like it's 45 hours on it a year for a couple of years, minus whatever we can glean from the Olivet efforts, which might be substantial, and it might have greased the wheels considerably. So it might be a couple hours a month for a year or two to get this certification. I don't think I think the idea was a good one to try to do the best job we can with night compliant lighting on the pickleball courts, as long as the lighting is acceptable for the primary purpose, and it shines downward instead of upward, it's probably going to be just fine. Or 2 nights a year, and it's stargazers like it in the spring and in the fall and in the winter, and there wouldn't be a whole lot of pickleball activity probably at those times on those courts, but something we would have to work out, and that's why I thought it made good sense to include Bluffview as well. But this doesn't seem burdensome to me. Please speak up, everyone in the department, if it sounds like it's a big effort, but I think it's a small effort for a feather in our cap and a couple of educational events a year and so on and so forth. That's just my maybe my personal opinion, but thanks for listening.
Thank you, Rob. Steve, go ahead. Maybe you can ease some minds on the staff time as well.
Well, they get a 3-day weekend this coming weekend, so that'll help. But
Store up your energy.
there you go. We'll talk about that because we do have a tendency to sometimes take on more than we can handle. And so that'll be a conversation to have with the department. But I do have a specific question for Joe, Melanie, and Gary. On the table, the last line item on the table has to do with extended park hours. So question number 1 is, what is the closing time of our parks? And I assume they're all the same. So community park, let's talk community park in Bellevue. Gary, you're more involved. Can you tell me what are the closing hours for community park right now?
Community Park is a half hour after sunset. Bluffview Park is extended till 10 p.m. So we've already changed the hours for Bluffview Park.
Okay. So if we went forward with this, and let's say that community park ended up being the park that we designate, you would extend those hours till what time? Would that be till 10 or would it be later than 10?
I believe that we have some say in that. It's not actually listed in the regulations that are in the designation regulations. However, it did come up in Olivet when they were discussing it with the Dark Sky Association. And they ended up just leaving Stacy Park open 24 hours. And they had some concerns about it. Residents had some concerns about it. But as it turns out, it's kind of become a popular stargazing area, and they were having police drive through there anyway at night, even if it was closed. So it didn't really require a whole lot more effort in order to kind of keep an eye on the park. And so they were concerned about it, but it hasn't seemed to have been an issue thus far. But I do believe that, as long as we extend the hours to a certain, I'm not positive on that one. We'd have to talk with them about it.
Well, the point is raised on this table, and it's a good point. It's a valid point, and it's one that concerns me, especially if it requires more policing, depending on what the extended hours are. Particularly if you're talking about it's open 24/7 kind of thing. So I definitely want to bring the captain in on the discussion and find out with the way he has his patrols. And now somebody has to go through that park, which they don't in the case of community park. If it closes, I don't know how often they swing by through there, but you all pointed it out on the table, and I'm glad that you did, because it's a consideration that we need to make sure that we know what that looks like as well. Gary, you can chime in since you're pretty familiar with that operation.
Look, I think this whole thing's a great idea, and it would be great if we could do it for both parks. Community park is kind of a different animal, and the lighting that we have down there is minimal right now, but it's enough for the police officers to drive by and be able to see what's going on underneath the pavilion, and to see what's going on in the parking lots. If we change the lighting sequence, if we make them go out or something, then you can't see anything down there, which is the whole point of the night sky, the urban night sky. So I was talking with Joe a little bit earlier, and I have chatted with Melanie about this. Bluffview Park is definitely the park to consider for this, because we've already extended the hours. It's a much bigger park. There'd be several areas they'd be able to watch the night sky from. There is no lighting. We don't intend on putting any lighting down there. And with the improvements that we got coming, it would seem to me to be the ideal place for stargazing and so forth. But there's lots of things to consider, like you say.
Okay, well, I appreciate the input, and that's very helpful. Let's just make sure that we do have a conversation with the captain, and so that we know what that's going to look like as he tries to staff his precinct and decide where people go in the city and at what time.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Rob?
Thank you.
Yeah, Don, I've spoken twice already. I'm sorry, but I think this is an important new point. The pickleball may be of more concern in terms of extending the hours than occasional stargazing events would be at community park. are we going to address that sort of separately when we get the pickleball courts in, or?
Well, let's talk, we have pickleball on the agenda still, so let's talk about that at that time. Can we do that?
Sure. And so,
Okay.
if this isn't unduly burdensome, we still need to vote on that on my motion. But it sounds like Bluffview is the place for it based on what Gary said.
Okay. Thank you, Rob. So I don't see any other questions. So we do have a motion on the floor. And yeah, Melanie, go ahead, please.
If I may, and this is just to point out, we can include both on the application and see if community park even qualifies. My only thought including both of them is that they're both very different parks and they might be better for different things, you know, like different events. You know, they're very different parks, and so that you could host certain events at one and certain events at the other, it would promote both of them. And so as long as the community park didn't interfere with the pickleball lighting or it was too much of a challenge to get it as a designation, then we could very easily drop it off at no expense.
Okay, that's a great idea. So seeing no other questions, all those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Opposed.
One opposed, two opposed, three opposed. So we have Mr. Flasher, Mr. Glani, and Ms. McCutcheon opposed. And then 1, 2, 3, 4 in favor. So the motion does pass. And then maybe some of the questions that, I guess this is coming to council as well.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so maybe just some of the questions that Mr. Cross brought up with the police department, and we can just get those addressed before it comes to council. Great, thank you. Next on our agenda is, this is recent development trends within the city of Wildwood. This is an FYI that has been on the agendas here for the last few months. I like going through it and seeing what's going on specifically in my ward for sure. Does anybody have any questions for the department on this? Otherwise, we'll just move forward. Okay, seeing none, that takes us to park matters. If there's no objection from the committee, I would like to go down to the fourth item on this because I know we do have attendees that are here for that item, and I am going to apologize to Mr. Rambo right now because there's a really good chance that I mispronounced the Pertner.
It's Pertner.
Okay, well, I got to be close. The Pertner Parks. So Joe, you want to go ahead, please?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair and members of the committee, as you know from public participation tonight, there is a desire on a group of equestrians to utilize Pertner Park as a potential equestrian facility along with other uses. The Department of Planning was contacted by the group, arranged to have them visit the property in January, and ultimately gave them the direction to submit the letter for such a request. The department provided a memorandum on this particular matter for your consideration. And as part of that, it does identify that there is a template out there for a partnership of this nature, and it involves Bluffview Park and the Gateway Off-Road Cyclist Organization. However, as part of that memorandum, the department does identify that there are a number of questions that need to be answered before it would feel comfortable requesting an action or recommendation from the committee itself, so as then it could be presented to City Council. At this stage, there are, as I say, a number of questions, and tonight the department is just presenting this information to the committee to seek direction and any other questions or comments they would like resolved before a formal report is finalized on the matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Rob, go ahead, please.
Okay, for the attendees, this property was owned by my great-great-grandfather, passed to his son, passed to his son, passed to his girlfriend, and then passed to the city. And I've caught my first fish in that little lake there. I would say that it's 27 acres minus the house, which has to be minimum 3 acres, and the outbuildings, minus the lake, minus the bank and the water courses, is down maybe 20 acres or below. And the parking, including parking potentially for horse trailers, cuts that a bit further. The bequest was for preserving the outbuildings and for, I think it says something like quiet enjoyment of nature or something, words to that effect. I think if there are, any 2 horse trailers show up at any given time, the wrong time of year, and the meadows will be mud. And if an arena is the thought, I think the slopes and runoff are, of great concern. And I think the whole idea runs counter to the bequest. I'm hoping that Mr. Vunich can, answer that specific question, but I have other observations. The Greensfelder Park is less than 2 miles away via Hankin Road. And if there are horse-centric facilities there, it sprang up as a horse park, if I'm not mistaken, years ago. Granted, it's county, not city, but they have the parking, they have the facilities, and it seems lightly used. If there are horse folks that want to travel from Greensfelder to this new facility, they would be riding on Hankin Road, and shoot horses are like riding on ice. If it's, if you're galloping down asphalt, I don't think it's good for anyone, since there are no shoulders on Hankin Road. The idea that this would be a multi-use, horses, hikers, cyclists are sort of incompatible. They're not harmoniously compatible, let's put it that way. And the idea of enjoyment of nature, many older folks, less active folks, the elderly, birders, etc., would be dominated by the horses on this tiny little property. So in my opinion, philosophically, Wildwood should probably look to move from multi-use facilities to single-use facilities. And this particular parcel is too small to have riding trails that are useful and that are compatible with other uses. So I look for win-wins. And our wonderful director of planning and I had a conversation about this very point. There is a facility, there is a parcel being donated or has been donated about 6 times as large as this one, that connects up to that could be connected up to an existing facility in its local area. And it just seems tons more suitable, just incredibly more suitable in terms of road access, parking, options for trails, probably arenas. You know, the horse folks would have a horse palace instead of a tiny little park where they'd ride in circles like a carnival pony, you know, hooked to a pole with a rope. And so I think this alternative is probably much more suited to our exploration. And I'd like to ask Joe specifically to describe that alternative park, our alternative parcel, and see if we can get some comments on that.
Thank you, Rob. Joe, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As some of you may know on the committee, recently St. Louis County received a donation of property on Forby Road to add to Greensfelder Park. That addition in total, which I believe was 2 parcels of ground, was over 150 plus acres. Obviously, Greensfelder Park already accommodates equestrian type activities, and this addition onto it on its southern end might be a welcome location for more equestrian centric activities of the nature that the group has been describing.
Thank you, Joe. Teresa, got you next. Go ahead, please.
Well, my comments are similar to Rob's, but I just was thinking about the when we voted on this before, it was, I believe it was ordinance 2559. And it specified what that property, the partner park was left by Miss Joanna Yost to be used as. And she said undeveloped wildlife refuge, picnicking, bird watching, hiking, fishing remains in a natural state and to be named partner park. And it seems that she had specifics that we had to agree to, and I don't see anything about having using it as a place for the horses to come in or the people to bring their horses. And wouldn't they need, you know, I'm not a horse person, so I don't know what all is needed. The facility needs, is there maintenance that has to be done? There's just a lot of questions. Will there be more erosion from horses running through the property? I just have a lot of questions about that before we would take it any farther.
Thank you, Teresa. So Joe, do you want to respond to any of that now? I know you've got stuff you need to go back and do some homework on anyway.
Certainly, to Ms. Clark's comments, the hiking component to me indicates that trails are necessary on the property. And as I know from Greensfelder Park, those trails for horses can be used by hikers. They can be used by mountain bikers. So from that perspective, hiking kind of entails the establishment of trails, generally single track, natural surface types. For the park to function, we will have to add a parking lot. So there are some components, regardless of what type of activity or activities is allowed, we'll have to do improvements. And those improvements are not necessarily all consistent with nature, because we may have to have a gravel parking lot or an asphalt parking lot. We may have to have certain areas for shade structures, things along those lines. So I guess what I would say is I don't necessarily see an equestrian activity incompatible, but as I said in the memorandum, I think there's a lot of questions that need to be answered before we even make our first attempt at a decision. Thank you.
You're welcome. Steve, go ahead, and then Rob, I got you next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may, I think I'd like to suggest that this item get tabled. I don't think any of us here are qualified to determine if this is compatible or not compatible with the desires of the individual who bequeathed this piece of property to the city. I would defer that question to the city attorney, and I think Mr. Vunich and I should have a conversation with the attorney to make sure what is interpreted as a trail and so forth. From what we've heard here tonight, this does not sound like this would fall, as Mr. Rambo so eloquently put it, in terms of what that piece of property was intended to be used for when it was donated to the city. So I'd ask that that Mr. Vunich and I, if the committee will give us an opportunity to speak with the city attorney to find out what we can and cannot use that property for. I think that's the main question. All the other issues are superfluous. I mean, in terms of erosion and so forth, because if it doesn't fall within the guidelines of the bequest, then that kind of ends the conversation, it seems to me.
Good point. Rob, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I want to make it clear that I'm looking for a big win for the equestrian community around here, rather than a tiny little park that would be overcrowded with a half dozen horses and a few hikers and so forth. But Steve is exactly right. That probably should have been my tack, but I'm wondering specifically how we investigate that alternative donation, because it sounds like it's county property, and I don't know if it's going to be like Bellevue or something like that, Joe, or how would we look into that?
And Rob, that's a great question, but I just want to kind of stay on topic. That's kind of like probably a different subject or a different topic. So
okay, fair enough.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for understanding that. Any other questions? I mean, at this point, we're not looking for any actions. I think Joe's got some questions and some homework to do, and we'll just look forward to his next report. All right, thank you. And I want to thank once again the participants and the attendees that did speak and listen. We appreciate your input. Going back to the top of the agenda under Parks Matters is the Farmers Market manager. Natalie, she's done a great job. Joe, go ahead, please. Oh, Melanie, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Natalie McAvoy has been our farmers market manager since 2018. And although I haven't even been with the city through a market season, I've heard nothing but positive things about Ms. McAvoy and the farmers market. In the 4 years that she's managed the market's shown growth in the number and the variety of the vendors and visitors as well. This is especially impressive given that 2 out of the 4 years that she has been manager have been through a pandemic in which many businesses as well as other markets didn't survive. She maintained the market in compliance with county standards, social distancing requirements, and the like, in a manner that made both vendors and visitors comfortable. Much of the market's success can be attributed to her. Therefore, the department is recommending approval of the Farmers Market Manager contract with Ms. McAvoy. The proposal is consistent with the $20,000 approved in the 2022 budget, and it's the same as last year and the year before, I believe. Again, $18,000 of that would be paid directly to the market manager, and $1,000 would go for equipment replacement, and another $1,000 for required memberships such as the Missouri Farmers Market Association and Agri Missouri. So again, the department would recommend approval of the contract. Mr. Vunich, Mr. Cruz, and I are here to answer any questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I agree. I think she's done a great job in the farmers market. It's gotten better and better every year. And that's my personal opinion. And I've heard that from a lot of residents as well. So we need a motion on the floor to move forward with that. I got that from Ms. Nyan, seconded by Mr. Flasher. Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Great, thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is the discussion of the partnership with YMCA on hard courts. So we've got a couple hard court things here to discuss. So Joe, go ahead, please.
Mr. Chair, I know that Mr. Cross has had some conversations with the executive director of the Wildwood Family YMCA, so I'm going to let him kind of take this particular topic. Thank you.
Sure, absolutely. Go ahead.
Hey, thanks for the warning there, Joe. Didn't know that one was coming, but I think Joe and I will share in on this topic because we both have had independent conversations with the executive director. It actually started with Joe where he was meeting with the gentleman about a different topic, who then ultimately brought it up about that he wanted to put in some pickleball courts on the property currently, at the YMCA. And then Joe referred him to me. I did have some conversations with him, particularly if it was going to be the Y and you had to use it if you were going, you only could use it if you're a member of the Y, hours, those kinds of things, and as well as the location, which currently is a location, the proposed location. And Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think anything's changed, but it's an area that has a bunch of trees right now, and so removing those trees would not be a good thing, right, where they're proposing it. So, but it would be open to all Wildwood residents. He says there'd be no cost. They would maintain it, the courts. Use of restroom facilities, that's kind of open right now. So if people are there and, apparently they would not be able to walk into the Y and use the restroom facilities. So that could be problematic. I think, but more than anything else, I think if we don't look at it as competition to the courts that we're contemplating putting in at Community Park, now that we know at least Wildwood residents can use it and they don't have to be a part of the Y, I think that the location of it and taking down a whole bunch of trees is, in my mind, more problematic than anything, quite honestly. And I think Mr. Vunich agrees because he and I have had several conversations about that. So in a nutshell, that's what he wants to do is put in, I don't know, a couple pickleball courts there, but they would be taking out a bunch of trees, which is, as I said, problematic. So Joe, have I covered pretty much what you know, or what would you like to add?
Yes, Mr. Cross, you identified the key points. I think though, one thing I would just add to what Mr. Cross just described is that I think the YMCA would like us to fund much of the construction. And so again, that's I think that's the downside to the proposal as well, in that if we want our own facilities, we'll be kind of splitting the baby, so to speak. And I don't know if that's in the best interest of Wildwood.
Yeah, it'd be hard to fund something and not be able to use a restroom. You know, so at this point, are you just, is this just for information at this point? I mean, obviously it doesn't sound like you're looking for any action at this point, or just get some more information, or what are you looking for at this point?
I think we're looking for action, Joe, because he's waiting to hear if we're going to give the go ahead to go forward. So no, I think this is an action item in my opinion.
I would concur with Mr. Cross's assessment.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that for me. So at this point, does anybody want to make a motion to move forward, or just?
Mr. Chair, I would respectfully request a motion to extend to the Wildwood Family YMCA our appreciation of the consideration of the partnership, but that we are not in a position to proceed forward with it.
That was worded way better than me. So we have a motion to move forward from Mr. Flasher, I take it? Yeah. With that
I'm making the
recommendation,
motion
and then
to what Joe
seconded
just
by
did.
Mr. Galani. Yeah. So, okay. Any questions, any comments? All right, all those in favor with the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Cross and Mr. Vunich.
Thank you.
The next item on the list, something that's getting a little bit better reception, is the hardcore facility in Community Park. So Joe, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I'm going to try to share screen. Hopefully, bear with me. So, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, as we've gone through our discussions at our monthly meetings over the last 3 or 4 months, the plan for the pickleball courts in Community Park has evolved. And tonight, the department is presenting to you what I would consider a preliminary engineering design for the pickleball courts. I do want to describe some of the key aspects. Mr. Keitel, the park designer, has contacted a number of different municipalities across the region. And for the most part, what you see is an evolution of the thought about pickleball courts. And so tonight there are 2 main court areas. One is dedicated to tennis and basketball, and the other is dedicated to pickleball. And surprisingly, you can get 4 pickleball courts on a similar sized tennis court facility. So there would be 2 main areas of utilization, and in terms of pickleball courts, a total of 4. We've also looked into parking, and we do have 12 spaces available at the location. We will need to add about an additional 3 spaces. Much of what is shown is future parking, as you saw in the diagram that was provided as part of the memorandum. But to meet our zoning ordinance requirements, the 5 courts need 15 spaces. So again, we'll be adding 3. We've also identified pedestrian access to the courts. And as you can see, it works pretty well, given where the parking is located, as well as where the pickleball and tennis court basketball area would be. Additionally, we've taken into account the impervious surface associated with the facility, and we are showing amended soils to meet water quality standards because, again, we have accommodated most of the water retention, flood prevention, and channel mitigation into the original design of Community Park. The question now is, and it's a good question, and it's not one I have a specific answer for at this time, is the overall cost. As I mentioned at the January meeting, the cost of materials, particularly asphalt, has skyrocketed. We have budgeted $200,000 between 2022 and 2023 for the pickleball courts. My impression is that it's probably not enough based upon what I'm hearing in terms of cost of materials. I hope to have the final design plan for the committee at the March meeting, along with a cost estimate associated with the same. But I'm thinking at this stage, we're going to be well above $200,000 just to accommodate what's shown here. Mr. Chair, if there are any questions about the revised design and the cost, I'll be glad to try and answer them at this time, along with Mr. Cross, Mr. Cruz, and Ms. Ripito.
Thank you very much, Joe. I really do like this design. There's been a couple comments that have been made tonight regarding lighting. Is that something that we would look to get a bid on to see, as an option that, if we do want to light it, and we want to make sure that we're getting the right type of lighting that we've been talking about tonight as well?
We could certainly do that as part of the engineering and bidding plans. We can add the lighting component, and then we'll do it as an add alternate. So we can do a base bid without it and then see how much it costs as an add-on.
And just for my own knowledge, Joe, like, is it something also that, let's say the city, the council decides not to move forward with lighting today, so to speak, and maybe for the future, is it something that conduit can get run there so that that part of it is done at least, and then while you're there digging, so to speak?
Definitely, conduit is the least expensive of materials. And so from that perspective, we should plan ahead, because if they're as popular as everybody, as I know they are, and everybody has stated, I think we'd be making a mistake if we didn't plan ahead for at least some nighttime use.
Okay, thank you. Dan, go ahead, please. And Teresa, I got you next.
I have questions about the net. So like a tennis net, I mean, is this movable pretty easily so that people can play basketball on the basketball court, or they be restricted to half court play? And then, sorry, on top of that, with the pickleball stuff, can a tennis court be used where the pickleball is? I know at Schroeder Park, they have pickleball in the same area as the tennis courts. You can use it as either. So I'm just wondering if that's an option there or not. Thank you.
Mr. Flasher, in terms of your question, I'll answer the second first. Yes, we could actually stripe it and make the tennis court area an additional pickleball courts. We were I guess I was trying to keep it as simple as possible, not knowing, again, if tennis would be popular or not, or if pickleball is just going to be the primary use. But yes, to your second question, that's certainly doable. In terms of the net structure, I'll have to ask. I don't know the answer.
Hey, yeah, the net and those poles, obviously. Teresa, go ahead, and Rob, I got you next.
Yeah, my question, Mr. Bunich, is about the accessibility. And I noticed there's an accessible ramp, but I don't see an accessible wheelchair lift aisle for an accessible parking space. Are we required to have that?
Very much so, ma'am. And that's just, again, one of the things that'll come as we refine the design and engineering plans. But your point's well taken. And certainly we wouldn't proceed forward without accessibility being a key component. All of Community Park was designed with that in mind. And this year we'll be adding Braille to many of the signs that are part of the pavilion areas, et cetera. So yes.
Thank you. Rob, go ahead, please.
Yeah, first good catch, Dan, on the net poles on the basketball / tennis. My question would be going the other way. Mr. Vunic suggested that we could stripe the tennis court for additional pickleball, and I'm thinking these kinds of sports wax and wane, and there might be more call in the future for a second tennis court. And is it possible to do that? That would look pretty busy, just the way I'm looking at it right now. But I'm wondering if we could just make this true multi-sport facility, or at least consider that for the expansion. And my other question to Joe is, how much does that encroach on the Great Meadow? The Great Meadow is not looking too great with a whole bunch of pavement, and I'm just wondering, the kite flyers and whatnot that I see out there occasionally using the pavilion and whatnot. Are we just going to kind of give up on the idea of a Great Meadow, or is there still sufficient space? Because I can't really tell from this drawing.
Dr. Rambo, I would say we should never give up on the Great Meadow area. And if I were to provide an assessment of the amount of, let's say, hard surfaces we're adding, I'd say it's less than 10% of the 5-acre area.
Good.
And so from that perspective, I think it'll be a greater, it'll look different, obviously, with the pickleball courts there. But I think from the perspective of the Great Meadow, we'll still have at least 4.5 acres, if not more, available of it.
Awesome. So a lot of there's more human activity there, which is a great thing for the city. What about the tennis court striping?
I don't know that answer as well. So I'll get with Ken Keitel, the park designer, and see if we can come up with some different scenarios for your review.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you.
Rob. Dan, I see your hand still up. Do you have a question, another question?
I mean, if there's a motion that needs to be made, I'd love to be the one pushing this forward, because I think everything looks great. But
Joe, are you looking for a motion to move forward with the bid process, I guess?
At this stage, I wanted to ensure that we're headed in the right direction as we get to this stage in preliminary design and engineering. I've taken into account all the comments. I probably won't move to the next step in the design and engineering unless I think there's some questions that need to be answered, obviously, regarding accessibility, the court striping, and the impact of the nets and the poles that hold the nets. So at this stage, I'm probably not going to ask for a motion to proceed forward. I think I need to do a little bit more research for all of you. I'm sorry.
No problem at all. No apology necessary. Thank you, Joe. Teresa, I see your hand up. You have another comment, please?
Sorry, I didn't put my hand down.
Okay, no problem. So no motion necessary. Does anybody else have any other questions for the department? Great. It looks good. I mean, it's
really great job, guys. Great job.
This is
it's great.
Yeah, I wish we could. Yeah, wish we could have this in the next by April, but unfortunately, I know
it looks very good.
Yeah. That takes us to the next item on our agenda, which is update for Friends of Bellevue grant application. I will just kind of reminder, we did start a few minutes late, but we do have a closed session still, and want to try to get staff home on time, so to speak. So with the grant application, Joe, go ahead, please.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, I would respectfully request this item be withdrawn from the active agenda of the Planning and Parks Committee. Thank you.
Okay. Do we need a motion to do that, Joe, or just?
Yes, a motion and second and voice vote would suffice. So thank you.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor made by Mr. Galani, seconded by Mr. Flasher. Any question or comments on it? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next couple items are typically for information only items as well. Unless the department has anything that they want to talk about. Anybody have any questions for the department? All right, seeing none, that takes us to our closed session item. We do have one item for that. So I need a motion to go into closed session. Made by Mr. Galani, seconded by Ms. Clark. Any debate on that? Okay, we do need a voice roll call on that. Mr. Cruz.
Councilmember Clark,
Yes.
Councilmember Nyan,
Yes.
Councilmember Farmer, Councilmember McCutcheon,
Yes.
Councilmember Rambo,
Yes.
Councilmember Flasher,
Yes.